There is a reason your soulmate went silent with God. For nearly 12 months, prayer became something they avoided. Their Bible stayed closed. Their room became quieter. The words that once came naturally suddenly felt impossible to speak. And nobody around them understood why. But tonight, something changes. Because the event that brought them back to prayer had nothing to do with a peaceful morning, a beautiful church service, or an answered wish. It happened during a night when they had already decided to give up. And what they discovered afterward may completely change the way you understand your connection with this person. Stay until the end, because the final truth is not about why they missed you. It is about why heaven allowed the distance in the first place. For months, your soulmate carried a strange emptiness. Life continued around them. People laughed. Phones rang. Work demanded attention. Plans were made. Yet something inside remained untouched. They could stand in a crowded room and still feel completely alone. That feeling became especially strong after midnight. When everything went quiet, thoughts they had buried during daylight began rising again. Your face appeared in memories they never invited. A conversation returned without warning. A particular moment replayed in their mind with details they had forgotten. Sometimes it was your voice. Sometimes it was the way you looked at them. Once, it was something you said casually that suddenly felt important. They hated how often it happened. So they tried to replace the memories. New routines. New people. Longer hours. More distractions. Anything that could keep their mind occupied. Nothing worked for long. Eventually, your soulmate stopped asking why. They simply accepted the ache as something they would have to carry. Then their relationship with prayer changed. At first, they missed one night. Then another. Soon several weeks had passed. After that came months. Eventually, an entire year was approaching. The strange thing was that they still believed in God. Deep down, faith had not disappeared. Trust had become wounded. There is a difference. A person can believe heaven exists while feeling forgotten by it. That was exactly where your soulmate found themselves. One evening, they sat alone and looked toward the ceiling. Their voice was barely audible. Jesus, I don't understand you anymore. No dramatic music. No perfect speech. Just exhaustion. They continued. I asked you for an answer. You gave me silence. Then they stopped. Something about that sentence hurt more than expected. Because they suddenly remembered how often they had once prayed about you. Not once. Not twice. Many times. They had asked whether meeting you carried meaning. They had asked whether the connection should continue. They had even asked God to remove the attachment if it was unhealthy. Yet you remained in their thoughts. That contradiction frightened them. If the connection meant nothing, why was it so difficult to release? If you mattered, why had everything become so complicated? Your soulmate had no answer. So they made a decision. They would stop asking. That became the beginning of the longest spiritual silence of their life. But heaven was not finished with them. One ordinary afternoon, something happened that seemed completely insignificant. Someone mentioned a place connected to you. Your soulmate froze. It lasted only a few seconds. Nobody else noticed. The conversation continued. Yet their mind had already traveled somewhere else. They remembered the first time they saw you there. A detail came back with startling clarity. The weather. The expression on your face. The exact feeling in their chest. For reasons they couldn't explain, tears appeared. They quickly looked away. Why would an old memory still carry that much weight? That question followed them for the rest of the day. By evening, they were irritated. They wanted answers. Instead, another memory surfaced. This one was different. It involved a sentence you once said. At the time, they misunderstood it. They assumed you were pulling away. Now they wondered whether you had actually been protecting yourself. That possibility unsettled them. They opened their phone. For the first time in months, they searched for your old conversation. Their thumb hovered over the screen. They almost closed it. Then they opened it. Message after message appeared. Some were ordinary. Others were painful. A few made them smile despite themselves. Then they reached one sentence that changed the atmosphere completely. They stared at it. Read it again. And suddenly their breathing became shallow. Because the meaning they had attached to those words for almost a year might have been completely wrong. Your soulmate whispered, "That's not what they meant." Silence filled the room. They leaned back. Their mind began connecting moments that previously seemed unrelated. The distance. The strange timing. The unfinished conversation. The decision they had made. The night everything fell apart. For the first time, they considered a possibility they had rejected again and again. Maybe the ending had never been as final as they believed. That thought should have brought comfort. Instead, fear appeared. Because reopening that door meant confronting everything they had spent months avoiding. They put the phone down. Walked away. Returned 5 minutes later. Picked it up again. Then something unexpected happened. A notification appeared. Not from you. From someone completely unrelated. But the message contained a phrase that immediately reminded them of something you once told them. The timing felt impossible. They stared at the screen. Their heart began pounding. Then they did something they had not done in nearly a year. They knelt beside their bed. For several seconds, no words came. Eventually they whispered, "Jesus." That single word carried everything. Anger. Confusion. Longing. Regret. Hope. Fear. Then came the sentence that reopened their relationship with prayer. "If I have misunderstood what happened between us, show me the truth." They waited. Nothing obvious occurred. No voice came from the room. No miracle appeared. Yet something inside them became still. And in that stillness, one thought entered their mind. Not a prediction. Not a fantasy. A question. What if I stopped praying because I was afraid of the answer? Your soulmate opened their eyes. That question hit harder than anything else. Because suddenly the past year looked different. Maybe they hadn't been angry with God. Maybe they had been afraid that God would confirm what their heart already suspected. They sat there for a long time. Then they remembered another moment. A moment involving you that they had deliberately erased from their thoughts. And this time, the memory did not arrive alone. Something else came with it. A warning. In this spiritual narration, imagine Archangel Michael standing at the edge of that moment, representing courage against fear, and saying, "Do not run from truth simply because truth demands change." Your soulmate did not know why those words seemed to echo inside them. But they understood one thing. Their year of silence was ending. The next morning, they prayed again. Then again that evening. A tiny habit returned. But neither prayer prepared them for what came next. Because 3 nights later, your soulmate experienced something that would force them to question the entire reason they had walked away from you. And when they finally understood what that experience meant, they would realize that the person they had been trying to forget was connected to the very prayer they thought heaven had ignored. That is where everything begins to change. 3 nights later, your soulmate woke up at exactly 3:17 in the morning. There was no alarm. No sound had disturbed the room. Their eyes simply opened. For a few seconds, they stared into the darkness, trying to understand why they were awake. Then they felt it. A strange pressure in their chest. Not pain. Something closer to urgency. The first thought that crossed their mind was you. Again. Your soulmate sat upright. They reached for the glass beside the bed, took a sip, and tried to settle their breathing. Why am I thinking about them now? The question received no answer. Instead, another memory surfaced. This one came from a conversation you had long ago. You had mentioned something about prayer. At the time, your soulmate barely paid attention. Now the sentence sounded different. Almost like a message they had overlooked. They switched on the lamp. Their room looked exactly the same. Yet somehow everything felt unfamiliar. Their eyes moved toward the Bible resting on a shelf. It had been there for months. Untouched. Dust had gathered across the cover. Your soulmate stood up. Walked toward it. Stopped. For nearly a minute, their hand remained suspended above the book. Then they picked it up. The weight felt strangely familiar. They opened to a random page. Their eyes landed on a verse about fear. They read it once. Then slowly read it again. The word struck a place they had spent an entire year protecting. Fear. That was the emotion beneath everything. Fear of being rejected. Fear of choosing incorrectly. Fear of trusting again. Fear that the connection with you had been nothing more than wishful thinking. And perhaps most frightening of all, fear that God had actually been guiding them while they were busy demanding proof. They closed the Bible. Then laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny. Because they suddenly realized how much energy they had spent asking heaven for signs while ignoring the lessons already placed in front of them. That morning, they made a private decision. They would pray without asking for you. No requests. No predictions. No demand for an immediate answer. Just honesty. So they whispered, Jesus, teach me what I need to understand. That prayer was different. It did not try to control the outcome. It opened the door to whatever truth might be waiting. Over the next several days, something unusual began happening. Your soulmate started noticing patterns. A name appearing unexpectedly. A song associated with you playing in a place they never expected. A phrase from an old conversation showing up somewhere completely unrelated. A familiar location appearing in their dreams. None of these things proved anything. And your soulmate knew that. Still, the accumulation made them uncomfortable. Because every time they tried to convince themselves that everything was coincidence, another reminder seemed to arrive. Then came the dream. It began somewhere peaceful. Your soulmate was standing near a long road. The sky was dark, but the road ahead was illuminated. They could see a figure in the distance. They couldn't see the person's face. Yet somehow they knew who it was. You. They began walking. The farther they went, the brighter the road became. Then the scene changed. Suddenly, there was a locked gate between you. Your soulmate reached for it. It would not move. They looked toward you. You didn't speak. Instead, you pointed behind them. They turned. A shadow stood there. It represented everything that had controlled their decisions. Pride. Fear. Regret. Other people's opinions. Old wounds. Your soulmate tried to move forward, but the shadow grew larger. Then a voice said, "You cannot enter a new chapter while protecting the chains of the old one." Your soulmate woke instantly. Their heart was racing. The room was dark again. But one detail remained vivid. The gate. They sat there until sunrise. For the first time, they understood something painful. Maybe the obstacle between you was not distance. Maybe it was what they carried. Later that day, they searched through old messages again. This time they weren't looking for proof that you loved them. They were searching for the moment everything changed. Eventually, they found it. One conversation. One exchange. One decision. And then they saw something they had completely forgotten. A message from you sent shortly before the separation. It was not dramatic. It didn't contain a confession. There was no obvious declaration. But there was one line that suddenly made sense. You had been leaving the door open. Your soulmate had interpreted it as closure. That realization hit hard. They leaned back in their chair. Their eyes filled with tears. For months, they had blamed you for disappearing. For months, they had told themselves that you had chosen another path. Now they were staring at evidence that their interpretation might have been wrong. But another question immediately followed. If you had not truly closed the door, why had nothing happened? That question became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate prayed about it that evening. This time, their voice trembled. Jesus, if this connection is only something I created in my mind, remove the illusion. They waited. Then added, but if there is something I am supposed to understand, give me courage. That final sentence mattered. Because courage was exactly what they needed next. The following afternoon, your soulmate received an unexpected invitation. A person they had not spoken to in a long time reached out. The invitation seemed ordinary. A simple meeting. A casual conversation. Your soulmate almost declined. Something made them hesitate. Then they remembered the prayer from the previous night. They accepted. When the meeting happened, they had no idea how significant it would become. At first, everything felt normal. Small talk. Coffee. Old memories. Nothing unusual. Then the other person suddenly mentioned your name. Your soulmate went completely still. The conversation stopped feeling casual. The person across from them looked surprised. You know them? Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. Finally, they said, yes. Then came the sentence they weren't prepared to hear. I've always wondered what happened between you two. Your soulmate's expression changed. Because the person sitting across from them knew something. Something they had never told them. They leaned closer. What do you mean? The answer came quietly. I saw something back then. Your soulmate's heartbeat accelerated. What did you see? The person hesitated. Then revealed a detail from the past that your soulmate had never known. A detail involving the day everything between you changed. Suddenly, pieces began falling into place. The timing. The silence. Your reaction. Their own decision. For months, they had believed one person was responsible for the separation. Now that belief was collapsing. And there was something else. The person sitting across from them explained that someone had deliberately kept information from both of you. Not because they wanted to destroy the connection. Their motive was more complicated. They believed they were protecting someone. Your soulmate stared at the table. A cold realization moved through them. If this was true, then you had never received the full truth either. Neither had they. Two people had spent months believing completely different versions of the same event. And both versions were incomplete. Your soulmate left that meeting in silence. Outside, they stood beneath the evening sky. Their phone was in their hand. Your contact was still there. They could call. They could send a message. One sentence could reopen everything. Their thumb moved toward your name. Then stopped. Fear returned. What if you had moved on? What if you didn't want to hear from them? What if reaching out created another wound? They stepped away from the phone. Instead, they looked upward. Jesus, I need you to tell me what is right. For a moment, nothing happened. Then their phone vibrated. A message appeared. It wasn't from you. It wasn't from the person they had just met. It came from someone they had not expected to hear from at all. And the message contained information that connected directly to the hidden event from your past. Your soulmate read it once. Their face went pale. They read it again. Then they whispered, "No," because the final sentence revealed something neither of you had known. The separation had begun long before either of you realized it. And someone had been watching the situation from the beginning. Someone who knew exactly what your soulmate felt. Someone who knew about the prayers. Someone who knew why your soulmate eventually stopped praying. And now that person had finally decided to speak. Your soulmate stood there frozen. Then another notification appeared. This one was different. It contained only one sentence. Ask God why you met them before you ask why you lost them. Your soulmate stared at those words for a long time. Something inside them shifted. The question was no longer whether you would return. It became something much deeper. Why had heaven allowed your paths to cross at all? And the answer was about to take your soulmate somewhere they had spent an entire year trying to avoid. Because the next prayer would uncover the one memory they had buried so deeply, they had forgotten why it frightened them. That night, your soulmate could not sleep. The message remained open on the screen. Ask God why you met them before you ask why you lost them. Simple words. Yet they had created a question your soulmate could no longer escape. Why did you meet? They had spent months asking why you disappeared. Why the timing became complicated. Why feelings were never spoken clearly. Why everything seemed to fall apart just when it started becoming meaningful. But perhaps they had been looking at the wrong ending. Maybe the real answer was hidden inside the beginning. Around 2 a.m, your soulmate finally got out of bed. They walked across the room. Opened the curtains. The city outside was almost completely still. Then they whispered something they had not said for a very long time. Jesus, show me what I refuse to see. This time, there was no demand. No bargaining. No request for you to return. Only surrender. And that changed the atmosphere inside the room. Your soulmate sat down. Their eyes closed. A memory appeared. Not the first time they met you. Something much earlier. A moment from their own life that had nothing to do with romance. A season when they had felt completely lost. Back then, they had prayed for strength. They had asked for direction. They had begged for someone who could understand what they could not explain. Then life moved forward. Years passed. Eventually, you appeared. Your soulmates suddenly opened their eyes. Their breathing changed. They remembered the feeling. When they first met you, there had been an unusual sense of familiarity. Not physical attraction alone. Something deeper. Something they could never properly describe. At the time, they laughed it off. Now they wondered whether that feeling had been connected to the prayer they had forgotten. Their hands began trembling. They reached for the Bible again. This time, they didn't choose a random page. They opened to a passage they remembered reading during that difficult season of their life. Their eyes moved across the words. Then stopped. One phrase seemed to connect the entire timeline. Their past prayer. The season of loneliness. Your arrival. The separation. The year without prayer. It didn't give them every answer. But it gave them a possibility. Maybe you were never meant to become their replacement for God. Maybe meeting you was supposed to awaken something they had abandoned inside themselves. That realization was painful. Because it meant they had been asking you to carry a weight that belonged somewhere else. Your soulmate lowered their head. I made them responsible for my peace. Tears began falling. Not because they suddenly knew what would happen between you. Because they finally understood their own mistake. They had expected another person to heal wounds that only God could reach. And once that truth became clear, something unexpected happened. The anger disappeared. Not completely. But enough. For the first time, your soulmate could think about you without demanding an outcome. They could miss you without turning the feeling into desperation. They could remember you without blaming themselves. That was the beginning of healing. But healing was not the final revelation. Something much stranger was waiting. The following morning, your soulmate received a phone call. The person who called had no idea about the prayers. No knowledge of the dream. No understanding of the message from the previous night. Yet the first thing they said was, "I had the strangest thought about you yesterday." Your soulmate became quiet. What thought? The caller hesitated. Then mentioned your name. Again. For the third time in less than 48 hours, your name had appeared through someone completely unrelated to the situation. Your soulmate asked why. The answer was simple. "I don't know. I just felt like you needed to hear it." That sentence stayed with them. After the call ended, they walked outside. The weather was unusually calm. They looked toward the sky. Then spoke quietly. "Are you trying to get my attention?" There was no audible response. Still, something inside them felt different. For the first time in months, prayer did not feel like begging. It felt like conversation. And this is where Archangel Michael's symbolism becomes important. Picture him standing beside the person who has spent months fighting fear. Not promising an outcome. Not forcing a reunion. Simply reminding them, courage does not mean knowing what comes next. It means refusing to let fear decide for you. Your soulmate understood. Fear had made nearly every major decision. Fear told them to walk away. Fear convinced them your silence meant rejection. Fear made them stop praying. Fear even convinced them that asking God for clarity was dangerous. Now they were tired of obeying it. So they made another decision. They would finally investigate the hidden event. The event that had separated you. They contacted someone who had been present around that time. At first, the conversation was uncomfortable. The person avoided details. Changed the subject. Then your soulmate asked one direct question. What really happened that day? Silence. Long enough to become an answer by itself. Finally, the person admitted something. There had been information your soulmate never received. Something had been said about you. But it wasn't true. A misunderstanding had been repeated. Someone believed they were protecting your soulmate from heartbreak. Instead, their interference created it. Your soulmate felt the room spinning. Who told you that? The answer came. A name. Someone your soulmate trusted. Someone who had claimed to be helping. Suddenly, an old memory made sense. The strange warning. The sudden change in behavior. The unanswered question. The distance that appeared almost overnight. Your soulmate realized they had reacted to information that had never been verified. And you may have done the same. Two people. One misunderstanding. Months of silence. A year of spiritual emptiness. Your soulmate closed their eyes. For a moment, anger rose. Then they remembered the prayer from the night before. Show me what I refuse to see. Now they were seeing it. And the truth was more painful than expected. You had not simply walked away. Your soulmate had pushed you away based on something they believed was true. They had made a decision while emotionally overwhelmed. Then spent months blaming circumstances for the consequences. Their hands covered their face. A quiet sentence escaped, I did this. But even that wasn't the whole truth. Because there was another detail. The person who had interfered had not acted alone. Someone else had known. someone had remained silent. And that second person had a reason for staying quiet. Your soulmate discovered the name later that evening. When they saw it, their entire expression changed. Because this was not a stranger. It was someone connected to both of you. Someone who had witnessed the relationship from much closer than your soulmate realized. That person had kept a secret for months. And now, finally, they wanted to reveal it. Your soulmate agreed to meet. The conversation began quietly. No accusations. No dramatic confrontation. Just one question. Why didn't you tell me? The answer was heartbreaking. I thought I was saving you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Your soulmate stared at them. What mistake? The person looked down. Choosing someone when you weren't ready to become the person that relationship required. Your soulmate went silent. Those words struck deeper than expected. Because suddenly, the entire connection looked different. Perhaps the delay had not been punishment. Perhaps the distance had exposed what still needed to change. Perhaps God had not been refusing the relationship. Perhaps the season apart had been preparing both people. Your soulmate finally asked the question that had been haunting them. Do they know? The person across from them shook their head. No, why not? Because you were supposed to tell them yourself. Your soulmate's heart began pounding. They understood what that meant. The next step could no longer be hidden behind prayer. A choice had to be made. They returned home. Sat beside the bed. Opened their phone. Your name appeared on the screen. This time, their hand didn't shake. They began typing. There's something I should have told you a long time ago, then they stopped. Deleted it. Started again. Deleted that too. Nothing sounded right. Finally, they put the phone down. They looked toward the ceiling. Jesus, if I contact them, let it be from truth. Not fear. Not loneliness. Not desperation. Then something happened. Their phone lit up. A notification. Your soulmate looked at the screen. Their face changed instantly. Because the message was not from you. It came from the person who had kept the final secret. Only 6 words appeared, you were never supposed to know this. Your soulmate stared at the sentence. Their heart sank. Because suddenly they understood. There was one more piece of the truth. And this final piece had been hidden for a reason. A reason connected directly to the night your soulmate stopped praying. The night they believed God had abandoned them. The night they decided heaven had said no. They opened the message. And what they read next would explain why prayer disappeared from their life for an entire year, and why Jesus had finally brought them back to that exact question now. Your soulmate stared at those 6 words for several seconds. You were never supposed to know this. Their first reaction was confusion. Then came fear. What could possibly be so serious that someone had hidden it for this long? They typed one question. What are you talking about? The reply arrived almost immediately. I should have told you before you walked away. Your soulmate's heartbeat accelerated. Tell me now. A few seconds passed. Then the message appeared. The night you decided to leave them, someone told you something that wasn't true. Your soulmate already knew about the misunderstanding. But this was different. They asked, what wasn't true? The answer changed everything. You were told they had chosen someone else. Silence. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. That was the belief that had destroyed everything. Months earlier, they had been convinced you were emotionally committed somewhere else. They had believed there was no place left for them. So they withdrew. They became distant. They stopped asking questions. And when you noticed the change, you assumed they no longer cared. 2 people were reacting to the same misunderstanding from opposite sides. Neither knew the full truth. Then came the sentence that made your soulmate put the phone down. They never chose anyone else. Your soulmate covered their face. A flood of memories came rushing back. The last conversation. Your expression. The hesitation in your voice. The strange distance. The way you looked as though you wanted to say something but couldn't. Suddenly, everything had another meaning. They had mistaken your uncertainty for rejection. You had possibly mistaken their withdrawal for indifference. A single false assumption had created an entire year of separation. But there was still one question. Why had God allowed it? Your soulmate sat on the edge of the bed. For months, that question had been buried beneath anger. Now it returned. Not with bitterness. With surrender. They opened the Bible. Their fingers rested against the pages. Jesus, if this was all a mistake, show me what I was supposed to learn. That prayer was different from every prayer before it. There was no demand for a reunion. No attempt to force an outcome. They were finally willing to accept truth even if truth meant letting you go. And that was precisely when something inside them changed. The answer they had been chasing was not simply about you. It was about who they had become. During the year without prayer, your soulmate had learned something painful. They had depended on another person's presence to feel worthy. When you disappeared, their confidence collapsed. They thought they were grieving a relationship. In reality, they were confronting an identity problem. They had forgotten who they were before they ever met you. Prayer had once reminded them. Silence had forced them to discover it for themselves. That was why the return mattered. They were no longer coming back to God simply because they wanted you back. They were returning because they finally understood that love without spiritual grounding becomes fear. Attachment without wisdom becomes desperation. And waiting without trust becomes torment. Your soulmate began crying. Not the kind of tears that come from heartbreak alone. These were tears of release. They whispered, Jesus, I don't need you to give me this person. I need you to make me honest enough to handle whatever happens. That was the moment the year ended. Not when they found the hidden message. Not when they discovered the misunderstanding. Not when your name appeared again. The year ended when they stopped trying to control the answer. And then came the part nobody expected. Your soulmate prayed for you. Not for you to return. Not for you to call. Not for you to choose them. They prayed that you would be protected. That your heart would heal. That your path would become clear. That you would not carry the pain created by their silence. They whispered your name once. Then said, if I hurt them, give them peace even if that peace does not include me. That prayer broke something open. Because genuine love had finally replaced fear. And according to this spiritual narration, that is where Archangel Michael's presence becomes significant. Imagine him standing between the old fear and the new courage. His message is not, you are guaranteed this person. His message is stronger, stand in truth. Let fear lose its authority over your choices. Your soulmate understood. For the first time, they were ready to act without demanding a particular result. They picked up their phone. Opened your conversation. Their finger rested over the message field. This time, they didn't write a dramatic confession. They didn't create a perfect explanation. They simply wrote, I owe you the truth. They stared at the words. Then continued. I misunderstood something important. I know that doesn't erase what happened, but I don't want another day to pass without admitting it. Their finger hovered over send. Fear returned. One last attempt. What if you ignored them? What if you had moved on? What if the damage was too deep? Your soulmate closed their eyes. Jesus, I release the outcome. Then they pressed send. The message disappeared. For several minutes, nothing happened. 5 minutes. 10. 20. They placed the phone face down. Then turned it over again. Nothing. Another 10 minutes passed. Still nothing. They almost convinced themselves that silence was the answer. Then the phone vibrated. Your soulmate froze. They looked at the screen. Your name was there. One message. Only one. I've been waiting for you to tell me the truth. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears. Because you had known something was wrong. You had felt the distance. You had carried questions too. Neither of you had possessed the complete picture. The conversation continued. Slowly. Carefully. No dramatic promises. No instant reunion. Just honesty. For the first time, both sides were speaking without assumptions. And something beautiful happened. The connection did not suddenly become perfect. It became real. That distinction matters. Real relationships require conversations. They require accountability. They require patience. They require two people willing to stop hiding behind pride. Your soulmate admitted everything. The fear. The misunderstanding. The year without prayer. The night spent thinking about you. The reason they had avoided contacting you. And finally, the truth about what brought them back to God. You asked one question. Why did you start praying again? Your soulmate stared at that message for a long time. They could have given an easy answer. They could have said they missed you. They could have said they wanted another chance. Instead, they told you the truth. I realized I was asking God to remove you when I had never asked Him to change me. That sentence became the turning point. Because your soulmate finally understood the hidden lesson. The prayer was never simply about getting you back. The year was not simply about losing you. The silence exposed everything that needed healing. Pride. Fear. Control. Insecurity. Unspoken assumptions. And the desperate need for certainty. Once those things were confronted, prayer no longer felt like a negotiation. It became trust. That was the real reason they returned. And here is the final revelation. The moment that first pushed your soulmate back toward prayer was connected to you. But not in the way you probably expected. It wasn't a mysterious prediction. It wasn't a stranger appearing with supernatural information. It wasn't a dream telling them exactly what would happen. It was something far simpler. They found an old message from you. One sentence. Written during a difficult season. You had said, "Whatever happens, I hope you never stop talking to God." Your soulmate had forgotten that message existed. You had probably forgotten it too. But when they discovered it again after nearly a year of spiritual silence, they broke down. Because you had unknowingly reminded them of the very relationship they had abandoned. That was the moment everything clicked. They didn't return to prayer because God was promising them a relationship. They returned because their heart finally remembered where its foundation belonged. And then they understood something even deeper. Perhaps the purpose of meeting you was never to become each other's entire world. Perhaps the connection was meant to lead both of you toward a healthier kind of love. A love that does not replace faith. A bond that does not demand control. A connection that can survive honesty. A relationship that begins with two people becoming whole rather than asking each other to fill every empty space. Your soulmate now prays differently. They don't ask every morning, "Will they come back?" Instead, they ask, "Make me ready for whatever you have planned." That is a completely different prayer. And maybe that is why this message reached you. Because if someone has been distant, silent, or confusing, you may be tempted to decide what their silence means. Don't rush. You don't know what another person is fighting privately. You don't know what fear has convinced them to believe. You don't know which prayer they are afraid to pray. You don't know what God may be teaching them in the quiet season. But you can choose what you do with your own heart. You can release the obsession. You can stop chasing signs. You can ask for wisdom instead of certainty. You can forgive without forcing access. You can love without abandoning yourself. And if this message touched something you have been unable to explain, write one simple sentence in the comments: I choose truth over fear. Let those words represent the decision to stop letting uncertainty control your heart. And if you believe God can turn a season of silence into a season of clarity, write, Jesus, guide me. Not as a demand. As a surrender. Because the most important revelation was never that your soulmate stopped praying. It was why they started again. They returned when they realized they had been asking heaven to change the situation while avoiding the transformation happening inside them. They returned when fear finally became more exhausting than faith. They returned when an old message reminded them that God had never truly left the conversation. And perhaps the same invitation is reaching you now. Do not chase what God has not asked you to chase. Do not force what needs time. Do not confuse silence with abandonment. Do not mistake delay for denial. Let God work on what you cannot reach. Let truth expose what confusion has hidden. Let healing happen before demanding an outcome. And if this person is meant to walk beside you, let the connection return through honesty rather than desperation. If the path leads somewhere else, trust that too. Because your future does not become smaller when you release control. It becomes clearer. Your soulmate spent a year trying to escape prayer. Then one forgotten sentence brought them back. One memory reopened a door. One honest question changed their perspective. One courageous message ended the silence. And one prayer finally taught them what the entire year had been trying to reveal: sometimes heaven does not remove the person you keep praying about. Sometimes heaven changes the person doing the praying. And that transformation may be the real beginning of everything that comes next.